good progress we're making here. We finished our repository, which means we're ready now to go and look at our view model. We have this set up for our view model already, but we'll need to update a few things, of course, for it to work, because we've changed a few things also. Now we're looking at the room database, and there are other things we've changed. So we need to make sure that our view model is ready for our changes. Okay, so we're one step closer to look at the user interface. In this case, the composables, the top level, the user interface. Okay, let's go ahead and find view model. There we go. Okay, so things are looking good, but now we're going to change a few types here. For instance, the first thing we need to do is we're also going to inject in our view model here our repository, because remember, that's what we're trying to do. We need, first of all, for our repository, we had to inject our DAO using Hilt. That was really simple. And now we need a piece of our repository so that we can get access to what repository has access to, in this case, DAO, right? So we need to inject a repository into our view model. Makes sense. How do we do that? Well, again, because we're using Hilt, we can go ahead and say @inject constructor as such and pass our val. Let's go ahead and first of all make sure that we import our inject. There we go. And I call it repository, note repository as such. And that's it. So now what we're going to do, because the type that we are getting, we are actually not using mutable state, right? Because mutable state is real hard to get it to work with room. So we've changed this. So I'm going to just comment this out. And instead, we're going to say private. I'm going to use the same name. And we'll say val. First, I'm going to create a private, right? Say note list. So this will have all the nodes. And I'm going to say mutable state flow like this. So this is the type that I'm looking for. And of course, it's going to be a list of nodes objects. And to initialize it, let's just say empty list. Because we're using flow, we're going to use the mutable state flow. So this is going to be the private state. So we are going to obviously have file here, which is going to be now a public state. So you can see the difference here. We have underscore. This means it's private. It's going to be used only inside here. And this is going to be our public API. Okay, I'm going to say note list as such. And I'm going to just say it's going to be equal to note list, or what we just created. And we're going to get, say, as state flow. So we're going to get the state, all of these nodes, and we have to say as state flow to say that indeed this is going to be holding a flow that is stateful, which is exactly what we need. So let's not forget to add the @Hilt view model to annotate that this NoteViewModel is a Hilt type. Okay, so let's go ahead and change a few things here. So all of these will need to change because we've changed the types and we've changed a lot of things. So for our add node here, let's start by saying, in fact, let's make this very Kotlin-like. I'm going to say this one, first of all, this is going to be suspend, right? Because we're going to have coroutines like this. And I'm going to use our repository. And in this case here, and in this case, I'm going to say launch. And in this case, I'm going to say view model scope, right? Because now we're inside of a coroutine here. I'm going to say launch, invoke this block. And here is where I'm going to say something like repository, get our repository, and then invoke the add note and pass the note as such. So I might as well just delete all of this and write them one by one. Create not suspend. And let's say update note. We're going to have a note that we're going to be updating. And we'll say view model scope.launch repository.update note, pass that note. And again, say remove note Same thing, view model scope, launch, repository, that update. Oh, that's gonna be remove. Or maybe we call delete note instead of remove. Same thing. Pass our note. So obviously in our init block here, we're not gonna go and get the data source and load our notes, because that's old news. But also you see that this is not gonna work because we've changed a few things. So let's comment this out. So what we're gonna do here is we are going to retrieve items from our database. We're gonna say repository that get all notes. But remember, we're getting these notes differently now because we attach these notes, or we wrap these notes with a flow state, right? So the best way to do this is obviously also add the view model scope here, and then say launch to launch this code block, which is part of our coroutine. But what I can do inside also, I'm going to pass a dispatcher object here, or dispatcher, that is, it's part of coroutine. I'm going to say IO. So what this means, there's a lot of information here and you can go and read about it. But what we're trying to do here is that we want to make sure that our highway, if you use that as an analogy, we want to make sure that this highway has a lot of different lanes. So if we have a lot of different lanes or many lanes in our highway, that means we can have more influx of cars. So that's what we're saying here. When we launch this code block, this coroutine per se, whatever we pass here, we want to pass as many processes, as many tasks as possible, because we will have that space to do so. Okay? And all of these items or all of these tasks will run in parallel. Okay, so this is where I'm going to say repository as such, and then that get all nodes, right? And then I'm going to invoke the distinct until changed, and then I'm going to say collect. So now I'm going to be able to go and collect information. In this case, it's going to be information coming in as a sequence of data, okay? The flow. So I have here my Lambda, and in our Lambda, of course, this IT, it's passing a list of notes. I can change this name to something that's more readable, list of notes as such. And then here I can even go ahead and check if this list of notes is null or empty as such. For now, I'm just going to say log d and say empty list, right? Something like this. In any other case, that means we have something. What do we want to do? Well, we want to populate our note list here with these values of lists, right? Because this is what we're going to be using in our NoteViewModel to access all of the lists of notes we're getting from our database. So simply, I'm going to say note list, that value. I'm going to set that. I'm going to get all the list and set that onto our note list like this. So our note list, that value, now this state here, it's a mutable state flow, should have all of the items from our database. Okay, so now that we finished this structure, we started from DAO, and then we created a room database, and we understand all of that, and then we created this repository, right? The source of truth for all, the single source of truth for all app data. So anybody who wants something from our database, they will go through the repository. So it's just a clean way to put it, clean structure. And we put together the view model. Notice now the structure we use for our data, it's not live data, and it's not mutable state, because with room mutable state, it's really hard to work with. At least that's what I found. So flow, it's recommended. So we're using flow instead of live data or mutable state. Okay, you could have used live data, but I chose flow. Now we're ready to implement our user interface, in this case, our composable. So get to our view model and see if we can start pulling in data that we have been working so hard for and show in our user interface. All right, so we will do that in the next video.